Then maybe your mother should start paying your rent, Miranda. The words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop them. The silver spoon clattered against the crystal dish, and silence fell so heavy you could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. My son Chris froze mid-breath. Miranda blinked twice, her painted lips parting in disbelief. Rent, Chris whispered, his voice trembling. What rent, Mom? That was the moment I realized my life and everything I thought I understood about love, family, and sacrifice was about to change forever. That night had started with love, or at least with my version of it. I'd spent all day in my tiny Portland kitchen, seasoning the chicken just right, roasting vegetables, whipping cream for dessert. I wanted everything perfect. Family dinners had become rare lately, and I wanted this one to feel warm like the old days before Chris married Miranda. When they finally arrived, the air shifted. Miranda stepped in first, the click of her designer heels echoing on my worn hardwood floor. She wore a tight scarlet dress that probably cost more than my grocery budget for the month. Chris followed behind her, eyes glued to his phone, looking thinner, paler than I remembered. Smells nostalgic. Miranda said, her tone balanced perfectly between compliment and insult. She glanced around my living room. You still have this same furniture? You know my mom redecorates every few years. Says it keeps the energy fresh. I smiled tightly. Well, every piece here holds a memory. I like things that tell stories. She tilted her head with that polite little smirk she used whenever she thought she was being generous. That's sweet. We sat at the table I'd set with my mother's old crystal glasses and the silver cutlery I only took out for special occasions. The candles flickered, throwing soft shadows across Chris's face. He looked tired, distracted. I wanted to ask him if something was wrong, but every time I opened my mouth, Miranda's voice filled the room. This chicken's a little dry, don't you think? She said lightly. Chris mumbled something, not even looking at me. I pretended not to hear. Then came the jabs, small practice disguised as casual conversation. My mom's house is so modern, Miranda said. She has these sleek marble counters and glass shelves, so minimalist. It just feels elevated. You know? I forced a laugh. Well, I suppose I've always preferred comfort over minimalism. Miranda shrugged, spearing another piece of chicken. Comfort's fine, but sometimes comfort can look stuck. Each word landed like a pebble thrown at my heart. I kept smiling, though. That's what mothers do, right? We swallow pride like medicine. We stay polite even when we're being quietly erased. When dessert came, the vanilla pudding I'd made every year since Chris was a little boy, I thought maybe this would soften her. It always made him smile as a kid. He used to say I made the best pudding in the world. But when I placed the dish on the table, Miranda gave it one quick glance and said, "Oh, I don't really eat sugar anymore. My mother says women her age should avoid sweets. It keeps the skin firm." Something in me snapped. I don't know if it was the condescension or the way Chris stayed silent through it all, or the exhaustion from years of being helpful without being seen. Whatever it was, it cracked me open. I handed her a small bowl anyway. Just try a little, I said softly. It's Chris's favorite. Miranda smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only cruelty disguised as charm. You're not half the woman my mother is, she said suddenly. The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. For a second I couldn't breathe. My hand froze midair, the spoon suspended between us. I stared at her. Excuse me. You heard me, Miranda replied, leaning back in her chair as if she owned the place. My mother built her own business. She's independent. She has a beach house in Malibu, a Tesla, a personal chef. She doesn't need anyone to take care of her. Meanwhile, you've spent your life cooking and sewing. No offense. No offense. It was strange the way pain doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in slowly like water through cracks in old wood. I thought of the years I'd spent behind a sewing machine stitching dresses for other women's weddings, other families' celebrations. I thought of the nights I went without sleep when Chris was sick, of selling my wedding ring to pay his tuition, of believing that if I gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, he'd always see me as his hero, and now I was just Small, old, a burden. Miranda. Chris murmured weakly, "Please?" But that was worse than silence, because it told me he wasn't surprised. He wasn't angry. He was just letting it happen. I stood up slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. "All right," I said quietly. "If your mother is so much better than me, then maybe it's time she starts paying your rent." The room fell utterly still. Even the air stopped moving. Miranda's smug smile faltered. Chris's fork slipped from his fingers and clanged against the plate. "What rent?" he asked, his voice rising. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I met his eyes. "The rent I've been paying for the last 6 months," I said, every syllable sharp and clear. $900 a month for your apartment, 100 for the bank transfer fee, $1,000 total coming out of my account. Every single month. Chris went white. Miranda stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. I felt my hands tremble, but not from fear, from release. For 6 months, I'd been shrinking myself, hiding the truth, pretending I was fine. But not tonight. Tonight, I was done pretending. I looked at both of them, the son I'd raised and the woman who thought she could measure worth by handbags and countertops, and I said calmly, "Starting next month, you'll have to handle it yourselves." Chris tried to speak, but no sound came out. I turned away, my heart breaking and rebuilding all at once. It was the first time in my life I had chosen myself, and I didn't know it yet, but it was only the beginning. The night after that dinner, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were washed, staring at the flickering light of the old stove. My heart still thudded from the confrontation, but beneath the anger was something quieter, an ache I couldn't quite name. How did I get here? How did I become the kind of woman who hid her own kindness like a shameful secret? It all began 6 months ago. Chris had shown up on my porch late one evening, eyes red, his suit wrinkled tie hanging loose around his neck. I remember the smell of rain on his jacket as he sank into my couch. "Mom," he said softly, I lost my job." I reached for his hand. "Oh, sweetheart." They said budget cuts, downsizing, whatever. "It doesn't matter. Miranda doesn't know yet. Please don't tell her." His voice cracked. "She already thinks I'm failing." I could still see that boyish desperation in his face, the same look he had at 10 when his bike broke and he thought I'd be mad. "It broke me then and it broke me again that night. It'll just be a few months," he'd said, "until I get something else." And without thinking, I whispered, "We'll figure it out, honey." But we really meant me. I opened my savings account, the one I'd built dollar by dollar from years of hemming dresses and altering wedding gowns. I called the landlord and arranged for the rent to be paid directly. Chris made me promise to keep it secret. "It'll hurt Miranda's pride," he said. "You know how she is." I told myself he was protecting her. Now I realize he was protecting his own image. At first I didn't mind. It felt good, needed. After losing my husband, helping Chris gave me a sense of purpose again. But months went by and Chris never mentioned a new job. I noticed Miranda's new clothes, her fresh manicures, her weekend getaways. My checks kept disappearing and my body began to ache in ways medicine couldn't fix. One morning, as I picked up my prescription for arthritis, I quietly set the bottle back on the shelf. $43. I needed that money for the rent. That night my hands burned like fire, but I told myself pain was a small price for love. The final straw came 2 weeks before that dinner. My washing machine broke. I stood in front of it, hands trembling, staring at the leak spreading across the floor. The repairman's estimate, $180. I didn't have it. I had emptied every envelope. That's when I opened my jewelry box and saw my wedding ring, the last physical piece of the man I'd loved for 30 years. I held it under the lamplight, the gold dulled from time, the engraving worn but still visible. Always. I sold it the next morning. When the pawnbroker dropped the cash into my palm, I told myself Robert would understand, that he would want me to help our son, that this was what mothers do, give and give and give again. But sitting there now in my quiet kitchen, I realized something painful I had sold, not just a ring, but my dignity. The sound of my phone buzzing broke my thoughts. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in 40 years. Daniel Brooks. For a moment, I just stared. My heart gave a strange little flutter, one I hadn't felt in decades. I pressed accept. Wendy, a deep voice said, warm and uncertain. It's Daniel. From college. I swallowed hard. Daniel. Wow, it's been 40 years, he finished for me, chuckling. I can't believe you answered. I wasn't sure this number still worked. I almost didn't. I admitted. It's been a long time. He sighed softly. I saw your name pop up on an alumni page. I thought, maybe it's time I reached out. I've been living in Seattle. Retired now. Engineering company. The kids are grown. The house feels too big. Seattle. I pictured the ocean I'd never seen, the wide open sky. The idea of distance of escape felt like air in my lungs. I was actually planning to visit Portland, he continued. Maybe we could catch up, or you could come up here. The view of the Pacific alone is worth it. I hesitated. That's kind of you. Think about it, he said gently. Sometimes the universe sends old friends back for a reason. When the call ended, I sat in silence. For 40 years, I had never wondered what might have been. Life had kept me busy, marriage, motherhood, widowhood. But now, with everything stripped away, the idea of someone seeing me not as a mother or provider, but simply as a woman, felt like sunlight on skin, long starved of warmth. I didn't know it yet, but that voice from the past had just opened a door I didn't realize was still locked. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the faint stirrings of a life I thought was over. Daniel called again 2 days later. I'd been sitting on the porch sipping coffee, staring at the gray Portland sky when my phone buzzed. Morning, stranger. His voice came through smooth as ever. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not unless you count reorganizing my sewing drawer, I said with a small laugh. That sounds serious, he teased. You always did like things neat. Remember when you color-coded your notebooks? I smiled despite myself. You remember that I remember everything. There was a pause, comfortable, familiar, like breathing air from a place I used to live. Then he said, come visit me, Wendy. A few weeks, fresh air, ocean views. You deserve a break. I hesitated. I can't just leave. Your son's grown, he said gently. You raised him. You don't owe anyone an explanation for wanting a little happiness. His words lingered long after the call ended. That evening, Chris stopped by. He looked tense, eyes darting around like a man expecting bad news. Mom, about what happened the other night. Don't, I interrupted softly. It needed to be said. I didn't mean for you to stop helping us. I looked at him, really looked, his nervous smile, his avoidance, the way guilt shimmered behind his eyes. That's the problem, Chris. You don't mean to, but meaning well doesn't make it right. He slumped in his chair. Miranda's been upset. She said you embarrassed her. She embarrassed herself. He winced. She didn't know you were paying, and that makes it better. I cut in. That she judged me while living off my sacrifice. He had no answer. I leaned forward, choosing my words carefully. Chris, I love you, but I'm 70 years old. I have fewer years ahead than behind, and I won't spend them being disrespected in my own home. He nodded slowly, shame flooding his face. You're right. For the first time, I saw something in him I hadn't in years, humility. After he left, I stood at the window, phone in hand, staring at Daniel's last message. Come see the ocean. And for the first time since my husband died, I wondered what it might feel like to live for myself. The next morning, I opened my laptop. My hands trembled slightly as I typed. Flight Portland to Seattle. One way. I hit confirm. For 40 years, I'd been everyone's anchor. Now, for once, I wanted to see what it felt like to float. The morning rain tapped against my kitchen window as I sat with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. My flight confirmation still glowed faintly on my phone screen. Portland, Seattle. one way. For most of my life, I'd made choices for everyone but myself, for my late husband, Robert, for Chris, even for Miranda. That morning, I decided the next one would be mine. Still, guilt is a stubborn thing. It clings like smoke, seeping into everything. As I stared at the ticket, I wondered if I was running away or finally walking towards something. My thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock. When I opened the door, Miranda was standing there, soaked from the drizzle, fury blazing in her eyes. "Can I come in?" she snapped. Though it didn't sound like a question, I stepped aside silently. She dropped her purse on the counter and crossed her arms. "We need to talk." About what I asked, though, I already knew. About you humiliating us in front of each other. You made Chris feel like a child, and me like what? I asked calmly, someone who disrespected me in my own home. Her jaw tightened. You didn't have to tell him you were paying the rent. That wasn't your place. I laughed softly. Wasn't my place, Miranda, that was my money, my life savings. She threw her hands up. You just love playing the victim, don't you? Something in me hardened. No, I'm done playing anything. I've spent 70 years being the caregiver, the fixer, the one who quietly cleaned up everyone else's mess. I'm not doing that anymore. Miranda's lips curved into a sneer. You're abandoning your son. I'm teaching him. I said, my voice steady. There's a difference. Her expression faltered for just a moment, then she recovered. You can't just cut us off. That's not what mothers do. Mothers, I said quietly, teach their children to stand on their own. I didn't realize until now that I'd done you both a disservice. Miranda's eyes narrowed. You're being selfish. I exhaled. For once, yes. The words felt strange but freeing on my tongue. She stood there a moment longer, glaring at me like she could burn a hole through my chest. Then, without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard the picture frames rattled. I sat back down at the table, my heart pounding. For the first time, I didn't chase after anyone. I didn't apologize for my truth. I just sat there, breathing. That evening, Chris came by. He looked weary eyes shadowed with guilt. I heard Miranda came here, he said quietly. I nodded. She's upset, he went on. She says you don't care about us anymore. I gave him a tired smile. I care, Chris. I just can't keep showing it the same way. He lowered his head. I don't know what to do anymore. You start by standing up, I said gently. You find a job. You take responsibility. You stop letting other people fight your battles. He rubbed his face with both hands. I've been trying. It's just everything feels like it's falling apart. I reached across the table and took his hand. Sometimes things have to fall apart before they can be rebuilt. He stared at me for a long time, eyes glistening. Then he whispered, You really mean it. You're not paying the rent anymore. No, I said simply. I'm not. He nodded slowly like a man realizing the ground beneath him was shifting for good. I saw a flyer today, he said after a while. Community center downtown. They're offering free counseling. Maybe I'll try it. My heart softened. That's a good start. For years I'd prayed Chris would take responsibility. I thought love meant shielding him from pain. Now I understood that love sometimes meant letting the pain do the teaching. When he left that night, I stood by the window watching the rain blur the streetlights. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel victorious. I felt human tired, yes, but finally honest with myself. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Ocean's Calm tonight. Thinking of you. I typed back before I could overthink it. Maybe I'll see it soon. As I hit send, I realized the word maybe no longer scared me. It was the first word of freedom. The first thing I noticed about Seattle was the air crisp, briny alive. It smelled like something new. Daniel was waiting for me at the arrivals gate holding a small bouquet of yellow roses. When he saw me, his whole face lit up. Wendy, he said, his voice cracking just slightly. You look exactly like I remember. I laughed. That's a kind lie, Daniel. He grinned. Then let me rephrase. You look real. And I've missed the real. That night he cooked dinner, salmon, lemon butter, fresh herbs from his garden. We ate on his deck overlooking the water, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a caretaker or a background character. I felt seen. You always wanted to travel, Daniel said, pouring wine into my glass. You told me once your dream was to see the Pacific. Took you long enough. I smiled softly. Life had other plans. Life always does, he said. Doesn't mean we can't rewrite the ending. His words settled deep inside me. The days passed gently. We walked the shore in the mornings, visited art galleries, laughed over memories of college, of how I used to fall asleep in the library, how he once tried to impress me by quoting Shakespeare and got the lines wrong. For the first time in decades, I felt light. In the evenings, we'd sit by the fire talking about everything we'd lost and everything we still hoped to find. He told me about his wife, who is now 2 years old. I told him about Robert, about the quiet ache that never quite leaves. He listened, not to respond, not to fix, just to understand. I hadn't realized how starved I was for that. One afternoon, I got a call from Chris. Mom, he said, his voice steadier than I'd heard in a long time. I started the counseling. It's hard, but it's helping. I also got a night job at a warehouse. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Pride swelled in my chest. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Thanks, Mom. And I'm sorry for everything. I blinked back tears. Apologies don't heal the past, Chris. Actions do. Keep doing what you're doing. I will, he said quietly. And Mom, you sound happy. I looked out at the ocean where waves shimmered under the fading light. I think I am. That night, as Daniel poured us another glass of wine, he looked at me with that soft, knowing smile. You know, Wendy, if you ever wanted to stay a while longer, there's plenty of room here. No pressure. Just think about it. I hesitated. You barely got me to visit, he chuckled. Then I'm on a winning streak. I looked around the warm light, the sea breeze, the faint sound of gulls in the distance. For so long my world had been small, a kitchen table, a rent payment, a never-ending loop of guilt and duty. And here I was seeing the Pacific for the first time, being offered not rescue, but companionship. I didn't say yes that night, but as the waves whispered against the shore, something inside me whispered back, maybe. The first thing that struck me when I walked back into my little Portland house was how quiet it felt. For decades, that silence had been comforting, the kind of quiet filled with echoes of laughter, footsteps, and the soft hum of a life built on love. But now it felt like the silence of something emptied out a room after the guests have gone, a story that has reached its final chapter but refuses to close the book. The air was thick with stillness, and I could almost hear the ghosts of my own choices. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, clutching my small overnight bag before finally stepping inside. The curtains fluttered gently in the breeze. On the kitchen table sat a half-finished jigsaw puzzle, one of those quiet hobbies I'd taken up to fill the hours when Chris stopped visiting as often. The sunlight caught the edge of a missing piece, and I wondered if I would ever find it again. I made myself a cup of coffee, strong black bitter, and sat at the table where so much of my life had unfolded. That table had seen birthdays, holidays, tears, laughter, and lately more solitude than I ever expected. I ran my fingers along the wooden surface, feeling the scratches left behind by years of family dinners. I had once thought those marks were imperfections. Now I saw them as proof of life of love that had existed, even when it wasn't returned the way I hoped. When the doorbell rang, I nearly spilled my coffee. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure whether I had the energy for another confrontation. But when I opened the door, Chris stood there looking nothing like the proud, defensive man I'd faced that night. He looked young again, but not in the way that made me proud, more like a boy who'd wandered too far and realized he didn't know the way home. His eyes were tired, ringed with sleeplessness. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and in his hands he carried a small brown envelope. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. My throat tightened. Chris, can I come in? I stepped aside. He entered cautiously as if the house might reject him. When he sat at the kitchen table, I noticed how his shoulders slumped like the weight of his own choices had finally found him. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the family photos still hanging by the doorway. There was one of him at 5 years old, missing a front tooth, holding up the first fishing pole his father had given him. I remember that day, he murmured. Dad took me to the lake, and I caught a boot instead of a fish. You were so proud of that boot, I said softly, managing a smile. For the first time in months, he smiled too. It was faint, fragile, but real. He took a breath, steadying himself. Mom, I'm not here to ask for money or forgiveness. I just need to talk. Can I? I nodded. Always. He rubbed his palms together, his gaze fixed on them. I've been going to counseling at the community center, he began. They have free sessions for people who are struggling. I'm glad to hear that, I said gently. He nodded, staring down at the table. The counselor asked me why I keep ending up in the same situations. Losing jobs, lying, depending on other people to clean up my messes. And I told her I didn't know, but she said something that hit me hard. He swallowed. She said I'm addicted to being rescued. The words hung between us like smoke. My heart ached. He went on, voice trembling. She said every time someone bails me out, you Miranda, anyone, I get this hit of relief, like I'm safe again. But that safety keeps me from changing, because I never face the real cost of my mistakes. I stared at him, blinking away tears. You think I made it worse by helping you? He shook his head quickly. No, Mom. You helped me because you love me. But I took advantage of that love. I twisted it. Every time you stepped in, I learned that no matter what I did, you'd save me. So I stopped saving myself. I looked down at my hands, these hands that had sewn his baby clothes, packed his lunches, held him through fevers. I had always believed love meant never letting him fall, but maybe I had robbed him of the chance to learn how to stand. Chris's eyes filled with tears. I'm 35 and I don't know how to take care of myself. I don't know how to be a man, and it's not your fault. It's mine. Because even after Dad died, even after you struggled alone, I still expected you to fix everything. I made you smaller just so I could feel big. Tears blurred my vision. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was warm, trembling. I thought I was helping, I whispered. You were, he said. But I turned your love into an escape hatch. You deserved better than that. We sat there for a long time, hands clasped, surrounded by the echoes of a life that had both bound and broken us. Then Chris pulled something from his jacket, the envelope I'd seen earlier. I wrote this for you, he said softly. Please don't read it now. Wait until you're on the plane. Plane, I asked. He smiled faintly. To Seattle. You're going right. I hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Daniel asked me to visit for a month. Then go, he said. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. It's your turn. His voice cracked on the last word, and I saw the boy I used to tuck into bed, the one who once told me I was his hero. He stood wiping his eyes. Mom, I can't promise to fix everything overnight, but I'm done lying. I'm done running. I need to learn how to build something honest, even if it's small. I reached out, touched his cheek. That's all I ever wanted. As he turned to leave, he paused at the doorway. I'll miss you, he said quietly. I'll miss you too, sweetheart. When the door closed behind him, I stood alone in the quiet once more, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. I made my way to my sewing machine one last time, running my fingers across the worn metal. It had been my companion through every joy and sorrow. I thought of all the stitches it had sewn, holding together other people's dreams. Now it was time to stitch something new for me. The morning I left for Seattle, the sky was painted in pale gold and silver. It felt like a beginning. Chris drove me to the airport. Neither of us said much. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, like a river flowing between two shores that had finally stopped eroding each other. When we reached the terminal, he handed me the small brown envelope again. Open it when you're ready, he said softly. And Mom, be happy. Don't look back. We hugged a real embrace, one that didn't cling but released. When I finally let go, I saw tears glistening in his eyes, but they weren't desperate tears. They were cleansing. I love you, he whispered. I love you too. As I boarded the plane, I felt the strange weightlessness that comes when you finally stop carrying something you've held for too long. The engines roared and the ground began to fall away. I opened the envelope. Mom, I used to think strength meant never asking for help. But now I see real strength is knowing when to stop taking it. Thank you for letting me fall because I finally learned how to stand. I'm sorry for every time I made you small so I could feel big. You're the strongest person I know, not because you endured, but because you're brave enough to start over. Fly high, Mom. You've earned the sky. Love always, Chris. I pressed the letter to my heart, watching clouds drift beneath the wings. For the first time in 70 years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. When I stepped into the arrivals terminal in Seattle, Daniel was waiting, his hair whiter than I remembered, his smile wide enough to melt years of loneliness. In his hands, a bouquet of yellow daisies. Welcome home, he said. Home, I teased, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled. Let's say temporary headquarters. We drove along the coast windows down the Pacific, stretching endless and blue beside us. I could smell salt, hear gulls, and feel sunlight warming my face. For years, I'd looked at the same view from my kitchen window, the same street, the same houses, the same sky. But this was infinite. Daniel's home sat on a hill overlooking the water. The first night we sat on his deck with mugs of tea, watching the sunset ignite the horizon. It's beautiful, I said. So are you, he replied softly. I laughed. At 70, that's either a compliment or a kind lie. It's true, he said simply. You've lived. That's the most beautiful thing a face can show. We talked for hours about his late wife, my late husband, the dreams we'd both buried for other people's sake. He told me about his years building an engineering firm, raising children, losing, and finding himself in the process. And for once, someone listened to me, really listened. Not as a mother, not as a caretaker, but as a woman with thoughts worth hearing. A few days later, I called Chris. His voice was lighter, steadier. Mom, I found a small job cleaning offices at night. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And I'm renting a tiny studio downtown. I paid for the first month myself. Tears filled my eyes. I'm proud of you. He hesitated. There's more. I've been seeing someone. Her name's Julia. She's kind grounded. She's not impressed by money. She just wants honesty. That sounds like someone worth keeping, I said, smiling. Yeah, he murmured. I think so. That night, Daniel and I walked barefoot along the beach. The waves curled gently around our ankles, and the moon spilled light across the water like liquid silver. Do you ever regret not marrying young? I asked quietly. He shook his head. Life gives you love in different forms at different times. I had one before, now I get another. Maybe the one that lasts. I smiled, feeling the truth that settled in my bones. He stopped, turned to face me, and took my hands in his. Wendy, I know it's soon, but we've lost enough years to hesitation. I don't want to spend the rest of mine wondering what could have been. My heart fluttered. What are you saying? I'm saying stay. Not because you need to, because you want to. The wind lifted my hair. The ocean whispered its endless song. For a moment, I thought of all the versions of myself I had been: wife, mother, seamstress, caregiver, and realized this was the first time I had been just Wendy. I smiled. Maybe I will. We stood there, two souls weathered by life but unbroken, letting the tide wash away what we no longer needed. When we walked back to the house, I looked up at the night sky stars scattered like stitches across dark fabric and thought, this is what freedom feels like, not running, not escaping, just choosing. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I chose me. It's been 6 months since I stepped off that plane, and every day since has felt like waking up inside a dream I didn't think I was allowed to have. The Pacific stretches outside my window, vast and shimmering, a canvas of endless blue. From Daniel's deck, you can see the horizon curve into the sky like the world itself is leaning forward to listen. I never imagined I'd live to see this view, let alone call it home. Each morning, I sit with my tea watching the gulls dive and the tide roll in, and I think about how strange life is, how it can shatter you, remake you, and then hand you something softer, wiser, infinitely more precious than what you lost. There are days I still wake expecting the ache, the hollow feeling in my chest that used to come from years of giving until I disappeared. But here in this place filled with light and salt and laughter, that ache has turned into something gentler, like a healed scar that still remembers pain but no longer hurts. Daniel's voice called from the kitchen. "Coffee or tea, my love?" His voice was warm, steady, the kind of voice that fills the quiet without breaking it. "Tea today," I replied. "With honey." He appeared in the doorway holding two steaming mugs. He had a daisy tucked behind one ear again, his small, ridiculous signature gesture that never failed to make me laugh. "What's funny?" he asked, handing me the cup. "You," I said. "You're like a man who never got the memo that he's supposed to stop being charming at 70. He grinned. I must have skipped that class. We sat on the deck together, the boards warm beneath our feet. Daniel's hand found mine easily, like it had been looking for it all its life. "Do you ever think about going back?" he asked softly. "Back to Portland, your old house, your neighborhood." I looked out at the ocean. The waves moved like slow breath. Sometimes I admitted. But then I remember that everything I needed to learn there, I already did. The rest was just noise. He nodded, understanding. "I feel that too. It's strange, isn't it? How the places that once held us so tightly can one day just let us go." I smiled. Maybe we finally learned how to open our own hands. Chris calls every Sunday now, never to ask for help, only to talk. Sometimes we laugh about small things, a new recipe, a movie. He saw a podcast he thinks I'd like. Sometimes we talk about deeper things, how therapy is helping him rebuild his sense of self, how he's learning to stop apologizing for who he isn't and start working toward who he wants to be. He's seeing someone new, Julia, a teacher, steady, thoughtful, with a wry sense of humor and no interest in pretending. "She calls me out when I try to play the victim," he said once, laughing. "She doesn't let me hide behind excuses. I think I need that." "I think you do," I replied, smiling into the phone. When I told Daniel about her later, he chuckled. "The universe sent him a mirror." "Yes," I said softly, "but this time he's brave enough to look." Sometimes I still think of Miranda, the woman who stood in my dining room and told me I wasn't half the woman her mother was. For a long time, that memory burned like a wound that wouldn't close, but now it feels distant, almost like a bad dream. Chris told me a few weeks ago that Miranda remarried a wealthy older man who could give her the life she always said she deserved. They moved to Miami, where she posts pictures of champagne glasses and infinity pools. "I don't think she's happy," Chris said quietly, "but I think she needs people to believe she is." I sighed. "Some people build cages out of gold and then call it freedom." He was silent for a moment. "I used to think money made people powerful," he said finally, "but I've realized it's true." I felt tears sting my eyes. He was learning, slowly, painfully, but truly learning. In late spring, Daniel took me to a small cove a few miles north of the city, a secret place where the cliffs curved into the sea like cupped hands. We walked down a narrow trail lined with wildflowers, the air alive with the hum of bees. "This is my favorite spot," he said, helping me down a rocky step. "I used to come here when I was younger, when I needed to remember how small I was and how big the world could still be." We stood on the sand watching the waves crash against dark stone. "I brought my wife here once," he added quietly, "after her diagnosis. She said she wanted to see something that reminded her of forever." I took his hand. "Did it help?" He nodded, smiling faintly. Yes, she told me that day that love isn't about holding on, it's about witnessing, being present enough to see someone fully before they go. I squeezed his hand. Then I hope we have a long time left to witness each other. He turned to me, eyes soft. Wendy, would you want to make it official? I blinked. Official. He laughed. Marry me. Not out of obligation or loneliness, just because every morning I wake up beside you, the world feels right again. The ocean roared as if it knew what he was asking. Tears filled my eyes before I could speak. I had never thought I'd hear those words again, not at 70, not after losing so much. Yes, I whispered. Yes, Daniel, I would love to marry you. He laughed a deep, joyous sound that made my heart swell. Then, almost shyly, he pulled a small silver ring from his pocket. It was my mother's, he said. She told me to give it to a woman who made life feel like spring again. When he slipped it onto my finger, the wind picked up, scattering petals from the wildflowers along the shore. It felt like the world itself was blessing us. We were married 2 months later on the beach behind our home. Chris stood beside me, eyes shining with pride. Julia held his hand tightly, smiling like she already belonged to our family. Daniel's children came too, 3 grown adults who hugged me as if they'd known me forever. His youngest daughter, Carmen, whispered as she pinned a daisy into my hair, "Dad hasn't smiled like this since Mom. Thank you for bringing him back." When the officiant asked if we wished to exchange vows, Daniel reached for my hands. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. I spent my youth chasing achievements. I built companies, houses, and a name, but none of that filled the space where love should live. Wendy, you've reminded me that love isn't about grand gestures, it's about quiet mornings, shared tea, laughter in the dark. You've given me peace, and in return, I promise you mine. I was already crying before it was my turn. Daniel. I said, my voice shaking. I thought my story was over. I thought I was too old, too tired, too used up for love. But you looked at me like I was still a woman with dreams, and I remembered I still had some. You've shown me that it's never too late to begin again. So today I promise not just to love you, but to keep choosing life with you and for myself. The waves broke gently behind us. When we kissed, it felt like the ocean exhaled. Afterward, we all gathered around a long wooden table Daniel had built by hand. We ate seafood chowder, homemade bread, and slices of lemon cake. There was laughter, music, even dancing, awkward, joyful, free. Chris raised a toast near the end of the evening. To my mother, he said, voice thick with emotion, "For 70 years, she's been the strongest person I know. But tonight, she taught me that real strength isn't just endurance. It's having the courage to open your heart again after it's been broken. It's daring to live when everyone expects you to settle. So, Mom, here's to your new life and to the man lucky enough to walk beside you." He lifted his glass. To Wendy and Daniel. To Wendy and Daniel, everyone echoed their voices carried away by the sea breeze. That night, when the guests had gone and the stars had come out, I stood alone on the deck looking out over the water. Daniel had gone inside to fetch blankets, and I could hear him humming an old tune I couldn't quite place. The ocean glittered under the moonlight, and I thought about everything that had led me here, every sacrifice, every mistake, every humiliation that had carved me into the woman I'd become. For years I had believed that love meant giving until nothing was left, that being a mother meant disappearing behind your child's needs, that aging meant fading quietly into the background. But here beneath the same stars that once watched over my younger self, I finally understood love isn't losing yourself for others. It's remembering yourself with them. I heard the sliding door open and Daniel joined me, wrapping a soft blanket around my shoulders. "Cold?" he asked. "A little." He pulled me close. "We'll warm up together." I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, strong, patient, real. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you ever think we were meant to find each other again?" He smiled into my hair. "I think we were meant to survive long enough to deserve it." We stood like that for a long time, watching the horizon blur into silver dawn. Behind us, our home glowed with the gentle light of the lanterns Chris had hung earlier, a home not built from duty, but from choice, a home filled with laughter, forgiveness, and the kind of love that expects nothing but presence. For 70 years, I had been everything to everyone, a daughter, a wife, a mother, a provider. But now, standing here by the sea, I was finally someone I hadn't been in decades. Just Wendy, whole, seen, free. And as the tide whispered against the shore, I whispered back, "Thank you for the pain, for the lessons, for the chance to begin again." Because the truth I've learned is simple, and maybe it's all that any of us ever need to know. It's never too late to be happy. It's never too late to love. And it's never ever too late to come home to yourself.